Ken Timmerman, it's a thrill to have you with us here for the first time on the Conservative Commander Radio Show.
Thanks for having me on, Sam. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, well, it is our pleasure, for sure. Daria Novak is with me today. She is in Connecticut, and I am here, and we want to ask you a number of questions here today, Ken. We're going to talk about in this half hour, and at the 4:30 half hour, focusing on some things happening in the Ukraine, and it's just because I believe there's a lot there to talk about. Some analysts, one leading one in particular, who I'm not going to say at this juncture, but one leading analyst is saying, quote, "It's the greatest threat the world has ever seen," end quote, referring to the current challenge there in the Ukraine. I'm going to start out with this. Do you agree with the statement? Is it that significant?
Well, look, Vladimir Putin is flexing his muscles once again, and he's showing his total disregard for the opinion of the rest of the world, and specifically of the United States government. He clearly does not believe that Barack Obama or the current administration is going to stand up to him. He has already made an initial attempt in Georgia when he invaded Georgia, the country of Georgia, and now with 30,000 Russian troops inside the Ukraine, he's essentially rubbing our nose in his aggression and laughing as we do nothing.
Ken, I'm going to have a guest on at the end of this program who's going to take maybe a slightly different approach. But I have been reading as well that some are saying that that Russia is invading the Ukraine. Some say that, where the protests were financed by the United States, and that the downfall of the Yanukovych, if I get that out right, administration was actually a U.S. coup, and that really we are the aggressors. That is what some are saying. Now, I will say that a friend of mine, a current contact who is over in working with Christian pastors in Ukraine, just wrote to me. I've asked him, what's it like on the ground over there? And he's in Kiev. He says, quote, they believe, clearly, Russia is doing the invading, which is what you're saying, not the U.S., and that the protesters on the ground were actually paid for by Russia. And in the end, they would prefer U.S. and European Union alliance rather than going with Russia. Now, in the larger sense, it clearly is apparent that the European Union and the United States appears to want to have greater influence over the Ukraine. Russia clearly wants to have greater influence over the Ukraine. What are the respective goals, and why is there such a focus now by these two? What are they seeking to gain on either side? First the European Union, U.S., and then Russia.
All right, well, let me just kind of back up just a little bit. Before getting into any kind of conspiracy thinking here, let's just look at the facts on the ground. There are 30,000 Russian troops in Ukraine today. If that's not an invasion, I don't know what is. If we put 30,000 troops in Mexico on the pretense that there was a breakaway province in northern Mexico that wanted to join the United States, I think we would be roundly condemned by the world community as well as by our immediate neighbors. Look at the response of Ukraine's immediate neighbors, Poland and the Czech Republic, Slovenia, and the European Union more generally, is all have all united against this Russian aggression. Now, there are some ugly sides to what's going on in Kiev. I certainly see that. I understand that the chief rabbi of Kiev has warned that neo-fascists within the new government in Kiev have threatened to murder Jews, and the chief rabbi has encouraged Jewish Ukrainians to flee the country. That is a very, very ugly and disturbing development. But 30,000 Russian troops on one side and 0 U.S. troops on the other side, I think, make a pretty clear balance. We know who the aggressor is.
What is it that the European Union and the U.S. want? Are they wanting just to prevent westward expansion by Russia, or is there something strategic that they really want there in the Ukraine?
Well, the Russians are trying to maintain control over the oil and gas export pipelines from Siberia. Many of those, most of them, in fact, run through Ukraine to Western Europe. This has been a strategic goal of the Soviet Union in the 1980s, and it remains a strategic goal of Russia today. You remember that this crisis began last year when Yanukovych, the president of Ukraine at that point, rejected an agreement that the parliament and the government had negotiated with the European Union in favor of a $15 billion payoff, immediate loan guarantee, if you will, by the Russian Federation. The Ukrainian parliament wanted to ally more closely with the European Union. They did not want to be in alliance with Russia. And Yanukovych rejected that, and that's in fact what sparked the popular protests that ultimately led to Yanukovych's downfall and his retreat to Crimea. So we have to really put this in perspective. It began with a split, a deep split inside Ukraine between those Ukrainians who saw themselves as Europeans and therefore want to be allied with the European Union, and those who were the Slavophiles who saw themselves allied with Russia. And that's what you're seeing today. That's how it's playing out.
In that regard, if you look at a map with all of the pipelines running through Ukraine, it looks like a heart with the arteries going over into Europe. Putin has before turned off the valve, and he could turn off the valve again to Europe. Do you believe that he ultimately controls the ace card regardless of what the United States and the European Union have because he sits on that side of the pipeline?
Well, I don't, and I think that's why he is being so aggressive here, is because he understands that the Europeans and the United States and our friends in the Caspian region in particular do have other options. The United States has been deeply engaged for more than a decade in Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan sits on enormous oil and gas reserves in the Caspian. They are building new pipelines with British Petroleum and others, and U.S. oil companies as well, to bring that oil and gas into Europe, bypassing Russia. They don't want to bring it in through Russian territory. They want to bring it in out through Turkey into the Bosphorus and then ultimately into the Mediterranean.
Ken, I'm going to have to interrupt. We have to break away. Can you stay with us through the break here, please?
Sure.
Barack Obama, before the election last year, in that meeting he had with Vladimir Putin, which is very interesting now that we're talking about the confrontation here, where he leaned over to Mr. Putin and he said, off mic, when I'm reelected, I will be able to do more. I don't know what for sure he meant by that. I don't know if what's happening over there right now is a part of it, but certainly he meant something by that. And I would like to know from you, as you perceive, what do you think he meant by that, and perhaps are we seeing some of that take place even now, perhaps in the Ukraine?
Well, the context in which he made that remark was about missile defense, and he said, I can be, after my reelection, I can be, quote, more flexible. And a more supine president we have not seen in recent history. Barack Obama is about to make Jimmy Carter look like a hardliner and a pro-American president. A pretty extraordinary feat, if you think about it.
Well, today, I think I just heard today, announced just a couple of hours ago, that the militia on the ground in the Ukraine have issued an ultimatum, effectively, to the United States, saying that if you do not honor your agreement with us for protection, we will arm our missile tips. They're going to arm their missiles for anticipation of encounter with Russia. Could this, in fact, be about the treaty and what happens on that whole issue? I mean, is it possible that this president could be intending to back down and give away further missile defense?
I have long ago refrained from psychoanalyzing Barack Obama, just as I refrained from psychoanalyzing the women in my own family. It's a very dangerous venture, and you can never tell what Obama is going to do. We know that this is a supine president. This is a president who will not stand up to foreign threats. He is easily bullied. Putin is a bully, and he's understood how to get the better of President Obama. It's extraordinary when the United States continues to disarm and to downsize our military as Russia and China are building up theirs. I did a study 2 years ago as I was running for Congress against Chris Van Hollen in Maryland's 8th District of the Russian and Chinese military versus the U.S. military. And it turns out that by 2020, the Chinese, for example, will be spending more on defense than the United States of America if the sequester and Obama's defense cuts are kept in place. And Russia has pledged to build entire new generations of strategic ballistic missiles, nuclear ballistic missiles, nuclear missile launching submarines, and modern fighter jets and aircraft. We are downsizing, they are upsizing, and we have a president who does not understand that America's strength brings peace to the world.
And maybe, in fact, he does. Maybe that's part of the problem. Daria Novak, you're on the outside. You haven't said anything at this point. Daria, Ken used to work for the State Department, and Daria, I know you've got some questions here for Ken Timmerman.
Yeah, what I'm really interested in is what your opinion is on this. There's a vacuum in world leadership today. It seems that we've allowed Moscow to get its way in Syria, propping up Bashar al-Assad. They've enticed us, in a sense, into direct negotiations with Tehran over the nuclear program, which in essence is allowing the mullahs the time to really advance what they want to do with their nuclear ambitions, long-range missile capabilities. Now Putin's moving into Ukraine. Do you see Obama's statement that we are leading from behind as a policy of surrender? Is the xenophobia that's existent in the U.S. today so great that the West is not in the fight?
That's a good question, Ariana. I appreciate that, and I don't think it's so much the xenophobia of American people. I don't think Americans are xenophobic. I think this is an administration which is, as you said, leading from behind. I have a book coming out in June on Benghazi. I've been working on it for the past year. It's called Dark Forces, and I can guarantee you that the story of what really happened in Benghazi is not at all what you've heard so far. It's much, much worse. And what the administration did, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, is much worse than what you've heard so far. Leading from behind, they were so eager to not appear to be in the forefront in the battle against Gaddafi that essentially they allowed our so-called allies in the Muslim world to arm al-Qaeda-affiliated militias. Now those groups have several thousand shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles that are capable of bringing down aircraft, like perhaps this one that's disappeared in Malaysia. And we have sat by, we've watched it happen, and done nothing at all to stop it. That's going to be in my new book, Dark Forces, The Truth About What Happened in Benghazi.
It seems like there's an awful lot that we can do. When I'm talking to various people down at CPAC and at other events, it's like, oh, well, we don't want to go to war. But I know there's an awful lot that we could do. I think we could really seriously warn Russia, not just talk about it. What do you think about doing things like withdrawing from the New START treaty, real sanctions, taking the Magnitsky Act, which restricts travel to the U.S. of Russian officials implicated in human rights violations, enforce that. Rally key allies. Do you see us doing any of these things, this administration?
Those are all very good suggestions, and I think that Congress is going to follow up on several of them. But this administration and the president doesn't want to do it. He is afraid of taking a hard stance towards Putin. He's afraid of taking a hard stance anywhere. He couldn't even make a decision when his own administration, people in his own administration, wanted to stand up to Bashar al-Assad in Syria. He couldn't even make a decision to launch any kind of military strike. I personally was against it for other reasons, but when you announce publicly, as the Secretary of State did, that if we carried out military action, it would be very, very, very small, you make yourself a laughingstock. And for the United States of America to become a laughingstock around the world is dangerous. It's not just foolish, it's dangerous.
I just have one quick one. What about the export of liquefied natural gas to NATO partners in Eastern Europe? Do you think we could at least do that?
I don't know the technology involved or what our capabilities are. and I don't know how much they would be able to assimilate. I think even before that, we would certainly want to accelerate the natural gas deliveries from places like Azerbaijan.
Ken, let me get back in here on this side here. Let me go back to a larger question here for you, because I know you think in big terms. The European Union, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, U.S., really have made it very, very clear. They want to establish a Western-dominated government, the one world government, as far as that goes. I mean, the New World Order type of a thing. They've talked a lot about that. That's kind of gone down that road. But on the other hand, Russia seems to be, from comments that I've been hearing, it almost seems like they're bent to kind of reestablish the glory days of old big Russia. I don't know if this is what Ukraine is bringing it to this conflict or not, but where do you see this heading? Are we at those biblical, prophetical type days where we see these two entities coming forth?
Well, it's clear to me that Putin would like to reestablish the greater Russian Empire. Not quite the Soviet Empire in the same terms, but certainly a greater Russian Empire. You saw him nibbling away at Georgia. You see him now nibbling away at the Crimea. There are 3 other regions inside Ukraine that he would like to annex. So from that point of view, absolutely. Do the Europeans really want to establish a one-world government? They definitely want to establish a one-European government. But I must say, having lived in Europe for 18 years, I'm fairly well attuned to what's going on there, and I'm heartened to see the pushback from places like Denmark, at times from Norway, even Sweden, now from the French. The French were the first to reject the new European Constitution, even though it was a former French president who had written it. So I think you're going to see some pushback from some of these European countries who see their sovereignty being eroded by even a greater Europe, let alone a one-world government. I think that's a positive sign.
Ken, we're getting close to the end here. I want you, thanks for the answer on that, and thanks for going over all these things here with us on the show. I want you to be able to tell people where to go to follow what you're writing, and if you have, say, just a minute here or so, if you want to comment about the race that you're involved in Maryland, feel free to do that and tell people where to go for that as well.
Well, I never thought I would get engaged running for lieutenant governor in Maryland. I was asked by Charles Lawler, who's an absolutely extraordinary man. He's a black conservative 17-year veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps, a Marine major in intelligence. And Charles asked me to be his running mate because we believe that we can turn Maryland around and turn this state, which is losing jobs left and right. Companies like Beretta and others are leaving to no-income tax states. We believe that we can bring them back by eliminating the state's personal income tax and essentially bringing growth back to Maryland. So I've joined Charles. Our website is Lawler, Lollar, for governor.com, and you can just find me you can just Google me, Ken Timmerman, on the Internet. You'll find me in Facebook and Twitter and everywhere else.
Okay, Ken, when is the primary in Maryland?
Ironically, the primaries almost day to day, date for date, when my new book on Benghazi comes out on June 25th. I didn't plan it that way. The Lord has a way of deciding things for you, doesn't he?
A big day all the way around then.
A big day all the way around
Ken,
for me.
I want to thank you for being with us today on the Conservative Command Radio Show. We'd like to have you back again if possible, and we wish you the best as you're in this race and as you continue to speak, and glad for all that you do. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.